Tonight, I'm going to show you something that's a mix of distressing, disturbing, and depressing. Basically, business as usual. Something that annoys me about the internet today is that there's no such thing as balance. Instead, online media is intentionally designed to be as polarising as possible as to grab people's attention within a sea of endless competition. For example, if you were to look into feminism anywhere on the internet, I guarantee what you'll find will either be one of two different conclusions. First, you have the far left sycophants who like to pretend that feminism has been this complete and utter flawless success, whereby anyone that dares criticise it must simply be a misogynist. You know, the kind of people who say stupid silly things such as, "Yes, Queen!" But on the other hand, you also have right-wing fellows who create productions like Feminist Cringe Compilation 5579, whereby they take the most extreme examples of usually very socially distressed people and try to flaunt them as if they are representative of the general population at large. Yet, as stated earlier, with both of these conclusions, there is no real proper analysis of any kind, but merely expressions of emotion from two political factions desperately trying to push their own agendas. But I've never actually seen anyone sit down and attempt to deconstruct feminism with both its positive and negative aspects on society at large. And so, that's what we're going to do. The positives of feminism. Women now have the freedom to work if they want to. Alright, well, that seems pretty good. The negatives of feminism. The complete destruction of society. Oh. Alright, so picture this. It's 1960, and a bunch of rich, wealthy business magnates from around the world are sat in their billion-dollar private lounge, sipping some 1,000-year-old wine and having a chat with one another. All in all, pretty standard rich man stuff. But this time, it's different. In the corner of the lounge, a British, American and Canadian businessman start chatting to one another. The British businessman says, "Oi lads, I got an idea I want to share, innit?" To which the American man responds, "Well, come on dude, spit it out." "So get this right, you guys know those Soviet boys?" "Ew, you mean those filthy commies, eh?" retorts the Canadian man. "That's right, but get this right. Did you know that their women work?" "What in the badonka-donk are you talking about?" "It's true, mate. Check this out." The British man then shows a photo he managed to get of some Soviet workers, and rest assured, his eyes did not deceive him. They were, indeed, women. "Egads, man, what in the maple syrup are they thinking, eh?" "Those damn commies have lost their minds." "Right, but hang on a minute, chaps. 'Cause actually, I be thinking they're onto something." "What? Have you lost your mind?" "Imagine you go to the toilet and take a giant taco-fueled dump, innit? And it's one of those really bad ones that clogs up your pipes, right? So you need a plumber, innit? Well, right now, there's only like 100 plumbers in the city, right?" "Right." "Well, think about it. If women entered the workforce en masse, we could go from 100 plumbers to like 200. What woman would want to be a plumber, eh?" "Alright, bad example, but you get the point, lads. Double the workforce means more workers and more competition amongst those workers, which means more leverage for us and less wages for them. I call it the race to the bottom." "Limey." "Yes, mate. You're a genius." "Ladies and gentlemen, yes, thank you. We here at the League of Wealthy Bastards have an important announcement to make. Ladies, we are sick and tired of seeing you oppressed, and we think it's time that you be liberated. That's why me and my associates are announcing today that we are now pursuing a proudly feminist agenda." Oh, this is gonna be fun. And so, here we are, 60 years after feminism's introduction in the 2020s. So, how's it going? Well, society is made up of men, women, and children, and if we go through each one of these groups, we will see that since its implementation, Feminism has damaged them all, but in very different and unique ways. The damage that feminism has caused to men is, at this point, quite well documented, so let's start with the obvious. Whereas in the past one man's wage could pay for him and his entire family, now his wage can barely look after himself. And in most circumstances, both the man and woman are now forced to work, regardless of whether or not they want to. But why? Well, as the population of the Western workforce has almost doubled, there is, naturally, more competition amongst said workers, which often directly correlates with lower pay for the masses and a consolidation of wealth at the top. The top 1% are now richer than they've ever been before in human history, and certain corporations are now worth more than many major countries. Apple, for example, now has a higher market cap than the entire gross domestic product of Italy. Really. As such, many men now feel a sense of uselessness from not being able to sufficiently independently provide for their family unit, as was commonplace in the past. And as financial difficulties are the number one reason cited for divorce, as you can imagine, divorce rates have absolutely skyrocketed ever since, leading to huge amounts of broken families, whereby men specifically are often separated from their children, house, and more via unfair court proceedings. Fun fact, did you know that in 2012, wanting a dad was the 10th highest requested Christmas gift by children in the UK? Actually, that's not much of a fun fact at all. Whereas governments and corporations are meant to sacrifice for families, now families are sacrificing for governments and corporations. The economic system is completely backwards. But that's not even the worst part. Ever since feminism's introduction, there has slowly been a huge rise in male identitarian movements, many of which even outnumber feminists in population, whereby large swaths of men now feel as if the state and society at large is rigged against them, which, in many ways, it absolutely is. Feminism is advertised as equality between the sexes, yet in practice functions as anything but. Whereas criticism of women as a group is universally classed as misogyny and flat out dismissed, endless amounts of anti-male misandrist rhetoric is constantly allowed to thrive and propagate in the media. State-sanctioned discrimination also exists via programs such as affirmative action, whereby when women are discriminated against, it's called discrimination, yet when men are, it's called positive discrimination. Article 3 of the German Basic Law provides equal rights for all people, regardless of sex, race, or social background. Alright. Sounds good. There are programs stating that if men and women have equal qualifications, women have to be preferred for a job. What? Equal rights of all people regardless of sex, women have to be preferred for a job. And who can forget a complete lack of physical and mental health attention? Hey, European Union, did you know that men in Europe are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women, which is the highest ratio in the whole world? Oh my god! 1 in 4 homeless people are women! Which would also mean that 3 in 4 homeless people are men, but hey, I guess men just don't matter. And don't even get me started on the draft. Men, under the feminist dogma, are never seen as victims, but always an oppressor. A problem that needs to be solved. As a result, whereas men used to universally see themselves as the protectors and maintainers of women, now much of the younger generations of men do not view women as their beloved other halves, but as privileged rivals. Many young men have even started to flat out refuse to participate in society at large, instead choosing to indulge in video games or other forms of consumable media, as in their eyes they see no reason to support a society that actively works against them. To quote a legendary ancient African proverb, "The boy who is not welcomed by his village will be the man who warms himself with the flames of its destruction." And who can blame them? Whenever men try to talk about the many issues and discrimination that they face in the modern era, they often get looked at as if they're insane. Then we wonder why so many men end up going down the incel rabbit hole. Gee, I have no idea. Well, that's depressing. But what isn't so well known is the unbelievable psychological damage that feminism has also done to women. Study after study has shown that though everyone is more or less sadder than they were in the past, women in particular have had the most dramatic decrease in happiness, and are now statistically way more unhappier than ever before. Patrick Wanis, PhD. Feminism began as a movement in the 1960s to liberate women. More than 45 years after feminism, studies reveal that women are unhappier than they have ever been, even more unhappier than the 1950s housewife, which feminism tried to liberate. The National Bureau of Economic Research. By many objective measures, the lives of women in the United States have improved over the past 35 years. Yet we show that measures of subjective well-being indicate that women's happiness has declined, both absolutely and relatively to men. And make no mistake, these reports aren't just some backwater far-right propaganda either, as backwater far-left sites have also been essentially forced to admit this. The Guardian. Gains in women's rights haven't made women happier. Why is that? Since the 70s, women in the US and Europe have reported feeling less satisfied with their lives. HuffPost. What's happening to women's happiness? Over the last 40 years or so, life is not trending towards more fulfillment for women. Life is, in most ways we can measure, becoming more draining instead. And you know when even they admit it, that the situation must be pretty bad. The reality is that the feminism of the 1960s wasn't just about giving women the freedom to pursue a career, as was advertised. If it was, hardly anyone would be complaining. After all, people's opportunities in life shouldn't be determined by immutable characteristics such as gender. But no. The truth is that the feminism of the 1960s was also about actively coercing women into the workforce and shaming them if they didn't. Women, en masse, were told that if they wanted to, say, start a family, be a stay-at-home mother, or anything that even slightly resembled a normal, healthy family life, that they were brainwashed, oppressed, and living under the iron grip of the so-called patriarchy, and that only by pursuing a career could they ever truly be liberated. But there was, of course, just one problem. Women, by nature, are of course maternal, and typically want to start a family at some point in their lives. But under this new social order, it was as if they were now stuck between a rock and a hard place. If they became a stay-at-home mother, they would lose roughly 50% of their household income. But if they stayed dedicated to their career, they wouldn't have the time to be a parent. A lose-lose situation. And this is where the narrative shifted. A new term was invented, the supermom, who had both a shining career and was a perfect mother at the same time. Which, needless to say, unless one is immensely wealthy, is completely bloody impossible. And so, is it any wonder that women specifically are more unhappier than ever before? Not really. What society expects of women, and what most women maternally crave, are, for the first and only time in human history, at odds with one another. Women are expected to carry the torch of the next generation forward, as they always have, yet at the same time, somehow also maintain it. Which is, naturally, an impossible task. Under feminism, women are told from a very young age that what determines their worth in life is their career, and how much money they can generate for the economy. They are told that any maternal instincts to have sons and daughters are now naught more than an obstacle, and should be suppressed. Essentially, women are told not to be women, but to instead imitate masculine traits to the best of their ability. So, let's get this straight. Taking care of a husband that loves you and a family that you made is called oppression, yet working long hours for a boss that hates you is called liberation? Ladies, I hate to break it to you, but I think you've been scammed. What's that? You want a big house, a loving family, and a lot of disposable income? Well, sorry ladies, because your boss Jennifer wants to buy her second Tesla, and you're gonna do overtime to pay for it. So get back to work. Welcome to the concept of class warfare. Some of the most popular video games that men tend to play are often first-person shooters or other violent simulations, whereby they can act out their male-specific internal power fantasies in a safe environment. But do you know what the most popular video game is that women play? The Sims. You know, that game where you have a house, a family, and are in control of it all? Doesn't exactly take a genius to figure out why that is. Unfortunately, feminism has robbed most women of that opportunity. But hey, at least you can experience it virtually. Ask any mother what it is they love the most in the world, and they're almost guaranteed to respond with their offspring. Yet because many women now find themselves dedicating the prime years of their lives being in debt and slaving away for corporate entities, by the time they've finally reached the point where they have just enough money to live somewhat comfortably, they have often already gone through menopause. It's been observed that many women early on in life tend to declare that they have no plans to reproduce at all. Yet it's believed that many only say this with such confidence because it is just that, a choice. But when that choice is no longer existent due to the inevitabilities of menopause, a strange psychological phenomenon tends to occur, whereby many reportedly then feel a strange sense of overwhelming regret. The so-called crazy cat lady phenomenon is perhaps the most disturbing example of this, whereby elderly ladies who have no sons, daughters, or partners tend to have a huge harem of cats in an attempt to simulate the family that they never made.
There we go, sweeties. Come on. Come on. Lunchtime. Come on. Come on, kitties. Come on. Come on, sweeties. There you go, pumpkins. There you go. Come on. Come on, Snyder. Come on, honey.
Dogs are also frequently used and treated in the same way as a human child would be. Truly, a disturbing dystopia. Even the very concept of womanhood is starting to be erased, with the elite now demanding the public to instead use absurd terms such as birthing people. Even things such as women's sports and bathrooms are slowly starting to be dismantled and overwritten. Isn't it strange how women can get all the support in the world that they need, but only if it pertains to slaving away for capital, as otherwise, as far as society is concerned, they simply don't exist. Menstruators of Reddit. How long do your periods usually last for? I believe we used to call those women. Menstruators of Reddit. As it has become increasingly clear that the end goal of feminism wasn't to empower or liberate women, but to erase them entirely, many women who just a few years ago proudly identified as feminists are now instead dismissed by the media as extremist TERFs, and ironically enough, today find themselves in the same political aisle with the very conservatives that they once fought against. How ironic that an ideology literally called feminism would go on to become the least feminine idea ever made. Feminism was sold to women as having more choice, yet what choices has feminism really unlocked? The choice to either 1. End their bloodline and work their lives away for money, 2. Start a family but end up poorer and stressed, or 3. Get lucky and find a rich man in order to have the best of both worlds. Yeah, truly liberating choices. But the damage that feminism has done to both men and women is nothing compared to what it has done to children. Picture this. You have a typical town with a typical house and a typical family. A mum, a dad, and their son. The mother and father both work during the day, and the son spends time at school in the meantime. At 4 o'clock, the mother then picks up the son, and they both go home. The dad remains working a few more hours until he comes home around 6. This is the typical family's life today. Now obviously, both the mother and father, having just worked a long shift, are absolutely exhausted, as is completely normal. The son, on the other hand, being a young lad, is filled to the brim with energy. But the parents don't have the willpower to deal with him, and thus, to shut him up, they decide to hire a babysitter. A babysitter known as Mr. iPad. The parents both noticed that whenever they gave their son Mr. iPad, he would shut up and leave them alone, giving the father plenty of time to watch his sports, and the mother just enough time to watch her Netflix. Again, this is the typical family's life today. The problem, however, is that younglings obviously require parental attention and guidance, especially during their formative years. It is after all here whereby the human brain has much higher plasticity, which means that essentially, the experiences one has during these years will determine who they shall become later on in life. But if the parents are too tired, exhausted, or busy to shape their son, then who exactly is Mr. iPad? When parents neglect or fail to look after their offspring, it doesn't stop them from being curious about the world. It simply creates a vacuum that will be filled by whoever they encounter. And in this case, whoever they encounter is whatever they consume on the internet. But what is it exactly they are consuming? What is life like for the average neglected Zoomer? Playing video games filled to the brim with unregulated loot boxes, which gets them hooked on gambling at a young age. Or perhaps watching content creators who emotionally overact their reactions, causing hyperactive normality. Or maybe interacting with perverts on disgusting websites such as Reddit, whereby trying to avoid being groomed is like playing Minesweeper on the highest difficulty. The internet isn't a safe place for adults, never mind the youth. Yet as both parents are typically exhausted from work, there is now an entire generation today who find themselves being raised online. And all of the negative consequences of this are now on full display.
We paid up. Left now! Left now! Left now! Let's go! Let's go! Stop spamming the chat, boys! The Pack King is back! Daddy's back! Get in there, puppy! Get in there, puppy! Who's my dad, Bailey? 3 more to go! 3 more to go!
And we wonder why Zoomers are so stupid when they're watching this crap. You see, young people don't just consume content, they imitate it. Recently I read a story that came out of the United States that genuinely almost put me in a coma of depression. Remember when you were growing up and you had your first words? Most people's first words are often something like mama, papa, hello, hi, you know, things like that. Well, somewhere in America, you know what someone's first words were reported to be? Like, comment, subscribe. If that doesn't depress you, then I don't know what will. But that's not all. The internet is so jam-packed with endless amounts of information, distractions, and temptations that we struggle to focus on anything for longer than a few seconds anymore. Statistically speaking, the average person who clicked on this video has already stopped watching, and is now probably looking at some guy eating McDonald's instead. The average human attention span has significantly decreased in recent decades. In the year 2000, the average human attention span was 12 seconds. But over a decade later in 2013, this number was down to just 8. For reference, a goldfish has an average attention span of 9 seconds. We're being outperformed now by goldfish. Believe it or not, Microsoft did a study a few years back to find out the top factors that impact people's attention, and they found that it was a combination of media consumption, social media usage, and technology adoption rate. And when Microsoft is telling you to stop looking at screens, you should probably take them seriously. But it's not just the internet that's a worry. As stated earlier, due to the startlingly high divorce rate, many children now find themselves growing up without their father. Despite this, feminism has deluded society at large into believing that it's not a problem, and that women should simply be expected to do it all, and that fathers are merely optional. Well, let's see about that. Texas Department of Corrections. 85% of youth who are currently in prison grew up in a fatherless home. Optional. US Department of Justice. 75% of youth being treated in substance abuse centres came from a fatherless home. Optional. US Department of Justice. 85% of children which exhibit some type of behavioural disorder come from fatherless homes. Optional. US Department of Justice. 90% of youth who decide to run away from home or become homeless for any reason came from a fatherless home. Optional. US Department of Justice. 7 out of 10 youth that are currently housed in detention or correctional facilities come from a fatherless home. Optional. US Census Bureau. 44% of children raised by single mothers were living in poverty, as opposed to just 12% whose parents were living together and married. Optional. US Department of Justice. 63% of youth suicides were from those living in a fatherless home. Optional. US Department of Justice. 75% of rapists are motivated by displaced anger that is associated with feelings of abandonment that involve their father. Optional. Time to ditch Father's Day? Some claim Father's Day is no longer relevant in today's society. Yeah, that's the problem. Many couples, even those who are in stable relationships, have now chose not to reproduce, simply because they no longer have the time or money to even be able to do so, which has led to the lowest birth rates ever recorded in human history in practically all economically developed countries. A nation must have a birth rate of 2.2 or higher to keep its population afloat. Many countries now struggle to barely have one. Reproduction is now considered a privilege for only the privileged. This is the population pyramid of Ghana. Ghana, as you can see, is a very demographically healthy nation, with much more young people than old people across the board. However, if we take a look at the population pyramid of Japan, wow, is that a different story. As you can see, Japan has more people between the ages of 70 to 74 than it does people 0 to 4, which, if you really think about it, is absolutely mind-blowing. The current population of Japan is about 120 million, but if the birth rate stays the same, that number is expected to fall to just 40 million by 2100, less than half of what it is today. Here you can see in real time the unbelievable generational aging of Japan from 1960 to today. And, by the way, this situation is pretty much the same in almost all economically developed nations. However, basic economics state that a nation can't have more old people than young people for very long, or the entire economy of said nation will collapse. This is because whereas young people tend to add to the economy via their work for many years to come, old people tend to have retired, while at the same time developing a lot of health issues, leading to a net drain on the economy. Therefore, if a nation has lots more old people than young people, then their economy is in big trouble. To deal with this, nations can either saddle their youth with lots of debt, as Japan has done, or undergo unprecedented amounts of mass migration, which is exactly what many EU countries did. However, as it turns out, importing huge numbers of immigrants, while not properly assimilating them into the nation's status quo culture at large, while at the same time expecting the population already there to instead accommodate for the new arrivals, will inevitably lead to massive societal schisms, as proven by events such as Brexit, alongside the unreal surge that far-right parties across the entirety of the EU have had and will only continue to have due to the stupidity and ignorance of their out-of-touch leaders. Yet immigrants are ultimately not the problem. The truth is that when a nation becomes so economically hostile to its citizens via factors such as stagnating wages and a consolidation of wealth in the hands of corporations, then it shouldn't be much of a surprise when the average couple now feels as if they can no longer afford to reproduce. The mere fact that such nations have to rely on immigrants in the first place just to prevent itself from collapsing proves that the economic system of such nations is fundamentally broken. And it's broken directly because of feminism. Honestly, it really is incredible if you zoom out and see the bigger picture at what an unreal domino effect of disasters that feminism has wrought since its inception. I told you this would be depressing. But hey, who's to blame? When people learn of the damage that feminism has caused, their initial instinct is to always blame the opposite gender. But the truth is that neither men nor women are ultimately to blame for feminism. The only people to blame for feminism, and who hold all the responsibility for the destruction it has brought, are those whom I spoke about earlier, the wealthy billionaire corporate elite. I'm sure almost everyone has noticed that in the modern era, there is no group of people that promote feminism more than corporations. Many people find this bizarre, as after all, isn't feminism a left-wing construct? Originally, yes, but the truth, as many are now slowly learning, is that the so-called left wing of the West has been funded and puppeteered by the very corporations they claim to oppose ever since the early 2010s. The left have transmogrified from being noble rebels of change into the supporters of a corrupt corporate status quo. Or, as their corporate overlords like to call them, useful idiots. Of course the wealthy love feminism, as it forces both poor men and women to work, lowering wages for both via competition, while allowing them to enrich themselves. To repeat again, when you realise that prior to 1960, one man's wage could pay for him, his wife, his offspring, and still have some left over, whereas today one man's wage can barely pay for himself, you will slowly start to realise how we've all been robbed, and how the billionaire-owned media has been gaslighting us for decades into believing that we're more developed and progressive than ever, when in reality, the only thing that's more developed and progressive than ever is the billionaires' bank accounts, while the rest of us are paying the price. The reality is that men and women are both two sides of the same human coin, and are made for one another, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Men and women were not made to compete with one another, but to cooperate with one another. The weaknesses of men are the strengths of women, and the weaknesses of women are the strengths of men. And thus, rather than point the finger at each other, men and women must work together to overcome such civilizational woes, if not for ourselves, then at the very least for our offspring. Remember, the billionaire elite thrive on division. If you are a man, they want you to hate women, and if you are a woman, they want you to hate men. So don't give them what they want. Men should realise that when faced with the evils of feminism, you don't have to become either a self-hating soy boy or an always angry incel. There is a sensible middle ground whereby you can understand that modern society actively works against you and help to assist in its inevitable dismantling, while at the same time still viewing women as your other halves and treating them well. Feminism does not mean women. People like this are not representative of 50% of the world's population. Trust me. At the same time, women should realise that all this hashtag girl power nonsense is naught more than a vain attempt at a charm offensive, so that companies can work you to the bone while giving you very little in return. Know that you have value beyond the material, and let no corporate or media machine try to tell you otherwise. Recently I was talking to someone I know about this gender relations breakdown, and I liked what she had to say, so I thought I'd put it in here. Men think women live life on easy mode, and women think men do as well. The truth, however, is that we're both just blind to each other's perspectives. Most of my girlfriends are on SSRIs just to get through the day, and from what I've seen, a lot of men are as well. No one is truly happy anymore. We're all just crawling through the day, wishing for a better tomorrow, but for most people, that tomorrow never comes. Do I want to go back to the days when you couldn't breathe without your husband's consent? No, obviously not. But I think back to my grandparents and how they had a certain synergy about them. They complemented each other in an almost perfect way. You don't see that with our generation. Today, most relationships are made out of convenience, or just to not be alone, rather than being soulmates. Now, as for how this will all end, the reality of the situation is that any society that has adopted feminism as one of their core principles is inevitably doomed to collapse. The sheer amount of issues that the ideology brings, both socially and economically, many of which have been listed here today, are simply too much to bear, and can only be described as a ticking time bomb. I predict that by the year 2100, there will not be a single nation on Earth that still proclaims to be feminist. As the out-of-touch corporate elite and their useful idiots continue to fumble around within their pseudo-academic bubbles of denial, the average man and woman will slowly continue to head in a more socially conservative and economically liberal direction. Meaning that it's only a matter of time before governments and corporations are once again tamed to work for the common people, and not the other way around. I can say with confidence that this will happen through a combination of slow political revolution and generational demographic change. Similar to what happened to Christians back in the 1960s, the current progressive status quo will slowly lose ground as each decade passes, until they are completely powerless, doomed to watch the world they built and once believed to be bulletproof slowly burn down around them. Meanwhile, the religious and family-orientated in general will simply once again begin to outnumber the irreligious and materialistic via sheer basic mathematics in a matter of generations. Essentially, this is a problem that will fix itself in the end. Until then, however, just try not to go insane.